Hello, it is my pleasure to introduce you to an eco-feminist artist, beautifully bridging the natural laws governing our environment with the man-made structures we create. With the CV spanning over 4 decades, yeah, Stacy Levy's art serves as a visual mnemonic, a collaboration with the forces of the earth and the life it sustains. You can see her creative approach in parks, airports, museums, galleries, marinas, and more. So, yeah, you can see why she's a really big deal for us. She takes this collaborative approach working alongside ecologists, urban planners, and communities, integrating creative strategies to engage and restore balance, winning her the Penn Future Award for Women in Conservation and the Henry Meigs Environmental Leadership Award, among others. In this episode, you'll discover how Stacy abandoned the white box approach to art making, bringing creativity into our daily passage. This connection is both aesthetic and a pledge to contribute to climate solutions. Listen as she tells us more about her climate disturbance series in glass addressing rising temperatures and her tide series devoted to ecological cycles and the gravitational pulls. Hi, Stacy. I am
Hey,
so honored to have you here today. I was going through your website and I am blown away by your career.
well, that's great to hear because a lot of times you don't get that much feedback. The kind of work I do, I put it out there and I might never hear about it again. So it's lovely to hear some positive feedback. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. And you know what? You have such a breadth over your career with different series. And so we are going to hopefully be able to talk to you about all of your series. But if we could just start right off the bat and talking about glass, because you definitely have a relationship with the landscape. But more importantly, I think that I really relate and especially love how you uncomplicate the relationship between the natural world and our human existence. And so, if we start off by talking about melting point,
Hmm.
and this
Well,
is glass. And so, if you could talk about that and like in terms of, yeah, is it hand blown glass? And just tell the listeners a little bit more about melting point and where your perspective was coming from, because that was part of your climate disturbance series, right?
mhm. Well, I love that you say uncomplicated relationship because my work is people always say, "Oh, what material do you work in?" It's like, oh, I'm kind of stuck there because I work in a lot of different materials, everything from bathroom sinks to granite. So and not granite countertops either. But it's so I have a pretty wide swath of what I do. I work with surveying materials, I work with kind of whatever works for the situation. And that's one of the reasons that I love glass is that first of all, it looks like frozen water, but it also is super archival, and that is a great thing because I build outside, and I often want to draw or show text, and it's really hard to say write with a Sharpie and expect it to last outdoors. So I have to always figure out ways of creating a text or patterns that will remain outside. So it's glass has been a great medium. It's kind of like great paper for me in a certain way. And I do a lot of sandblasted glass because of it. But that uncomplicated relationship that you pointed out, which I love, and I'll be thinking about that for a while, is really important to me because I don't want my work to be obscuring a relationship because I feel like our relationship with the natural world is already a little bit hands off, a little bit. I always say everyone feels like they're cooking in someone else's kitchen. They don't know how anything works, where the silverware is, where the measuring cups are with
Right.
the natural world. I think that's something we've lost, though. Sometimes I wonder how much we ever really had it. But when I get an understanding about a process that's happening in this earth, like the tides, when I know what tide it is or what the moon is doing, is it plumping or is it getting smaller, waxing or waning? When I know that, I feel really different about walking down the street than I did before I knew it, before I felt placed by that knowledge. And so that uncomplicated connection is very intentional. I want my work to be like a primer on how nature works in a very simple and pleasant way. Not like I think I was really daunted by science textbooks, and I couldn't, when you look at meteorologic textbooks, you can't figure out anything. It's all, I mean, if you have arrows, it looks good, but mostly it's charts and graphs. And I'm really into taking the idea of scientific knowledge and making it so that it has a different kind of visual metaphor, and you can get it and you can remember it just the way you remember things in a metaphoric way, more than you do if someone just gives you an equation. So I guess that's what I'm trying to uncomplicate the relationship with nature by making a communication that you can kind of sing to yourself in your head in 3 weeks when the moon's a different shape, and you'll remember what it is. Or you see the tide and it's high tide at 5 p.m. when you're coming home from work, and you thought the tide was high at lunchtime. And how did that change over the course of a week? So these sort of things, like making these mnemonics so that you can remember nature, are really, really important to me. But then that means the artwork has to be out on site. It has to be out there. So you're walking across it, or you're on a bridge and looking at it, or you're looking down through your bus window, or you park your car in that parking lot. Every morning you get out of your car in the morning, you get in your car in the afternoon, and you see the changes. A lot of this stuff does not occur in a museum. And that's a long way around saying my work has to be kind of self-explanatory to the people who were standing at the bus station. And so the materials that I use have to hold information, and glass is a great holder of information for me. And so
Ah,
that's one of the reasons I just sort of walked into glass. I'm not trained in glass. I have since become a little bit more proficient in it, but only enough to be dangerous. But I use it, I'm sort of glass adjacent, and I use it in my work when I can, and I employ a great number of gaffers to work on these things for me, and with me, but I'm not touching it. My problem is because I always want to touch hot glass and go, oh no, I think it should curve this way. And so I'm kind of a disaster in the hot glass shop. And I do a lot of cold glass working, and a lot of cast glass. So that is something I've incorporated in my work, mostly because it's a great way of conveying information. I write on glass, I draw on glass, and then I set it out, and half of it might be buried in the sidewalk, but there it is to be walked over and to have the elements rain and shine on it. And the incredible thing is, it's the only material that doesn't fade is the color. The glass, when you put it in, is the same color as when you take it out. And that's very cool for me.
wait, say that again?
The glass color is super archival, and there are very few other things. I mean, stone changes a lot over time,
Yeah, you're
and
so
it
right.
gets it
Right.
gets oil. Like I have a piece where there's a lot of people burn candles on it, and there are all these
Right.
stains from the greasy candles, which is, vigils need to be had, so that's okay. But glass, it's real easy to clean, and it doesn't absorb anything, and it doesn't discolor, and it doesn't fade. It doesn't have a UV life the
Right.
way a lot of
Right.
my plastics, if I have to use those, do. So it's a fabulous way of keeping color in the landscape. And that's why I love having glass in the landscape. I mean, most people think about glass as something you put indoors on a shelf. And I love the idea of having glass outside and just being there. Now,
Yeah.
it is a relatively brittle material, so you have to be kind of careful about it. But I love it outside. And I was very influenced by Chuli's the boats that he filled with those orbs, and then sending the orbs out in the water.
Oh,
That to
yeah.
me was like a perfect moment in glass. It's like glass doing what it does, which is float. And
Floats.
that's one of the cool things. You can have floats out there made out of this material. Now, God forbid, when they hit each other, I've had some problems with that. But it's just a cool thing that it's this beautiful, rich color, but it also floats, and it also continues to have the same external finish, except if it gets algae on it, that it started with. It doesn't wear out the way many, many materials do.
Yeah, it's quite a chameleon. And
Hmm.
you can make it look like stone, you can make it look like pottery, you can make it look like wood, even with the colors. So let's talk about your color choices. You're talking about metaphors and you're using them, or how do you feel about color being a motive,
Oh,
emotive?
that's a really well, I guess it's very personal. I mean, it's a motive to me.
Yes.
I love the colors, but glass isn't really something you can really run the color span on. It doesn't mix particularly well. So you have to run with the color that, say, Bullseye has created. Fortunately, I happen to like many of those colors and they look great together. But it isn't like mixing paint. And that's been a long learning curve for me to realize I don't have as much leeway with the color palette as I'd like to. But I'm often, sorry, that's my dog barking.
Oh,
I'm often making projects that are about water, and I'm wearing it now. I happen to really like blues and greens, and so that palette comes up frequently. But I also think it happens to be the most beautiful palette that glass tends to come in. And there's a really interesting thing to me. Because I work outside, I'm always thinking about UV and fading, and also thinking about the cost of things, because I might have to cover a quarter of an acre with something. So one of the things that I've learned is trying to make things that are stone-like things like cement or grout or tiles with warm colors super cheap. It's really easy to make red for concrete. You want a cool color in concrete, super expensive. Totally the opposite in glass. The cool colors, all cheap materials of tin and copper, all make these nice blues and greens. But you want something warm and red, you're going to be paying for it
you
because it's
can,
gold.
you're going to be
And
paying for it.
that's such a cool thing that it's the total opposite. Totally the opposite of, think of oil paint. Mary wears a blue mantle because blue was the most expensive pigment being made out of lapis lazuli. Whereas if you made her gown in glass, it was the cheapest one.
I love it. Yeah, not everybody knows that these colors that glass comes from are ores from the earth.
You're
And so,
right.
yeah, those warm colors are coming from gold. So they're just
Yeah.
inherently going to be more expensive
Yeah.
and will
Whereas
be
is in like when you're tinting concrete, it's coming from iron, and that's super cheap. So iron in concrete is reddish brown, and iron in glass is greenish blue.
isn't that such a trip? Yeah.
Yeah.
The science. This is where you're bringing the science and art together, just even with this series with
Yeah.
glass.
Yeah. It's more like cooking in a certain way. And glass is so close to cooking. In fact, many of the bakers that I know had started out as glass artists when they were in college and then went off into confection, because sugar and glass have a lot to do with each other, and heat times and baking are definitely interlocked. So glass people make great bakers
That's- I've seen a
and good
couple of
dancers too.
yeah, and dancers, is that what you said?
Yeah, because they have to
Yes.
work with like the punchy pole. You don't want to whack someone with a bunch of hot glass at the end of your pole. So there's a kind of group gracefulness that comes in with every glass studio that's successful, and they're all great dancers.
The
Haven't met
great
one that isn't.
dancers, yeah, very orchestrated. I always say that glass blowers are on time, but painters are late
Oh,
because
that's
the glass
interesting.
blowers have to bring, if they're working together in a team, they have to bring the color over at a certain temperature, how the
Mhm.
gaffer likes it. And so, yeah, they have to be on time. They don't have time to
Yeah,
be late.
right. Well, it's definitely a team effort. And I love that about art making, because I like a team collaboration versus this idea of going up into your studio, which is what I was trained in. The type of art I was trained in is you go into your own white box, you come back burying your masterpiece, and you stick it in another white box, the museum. And I don't know, that just left me really cold. So I'm much more into the collaborative aspect of making something and also installing something. So
Yeah.
I like that about glass.
It's like you were educated during that super modernist period where they were taking the spirituality out of the artwork and
Mhm.
using these abstractions.
Yeah, I don't know what they were taking the spirituality out, but they were channeling it so it was very pared down. And if you were sort of outside of that track,
Yes.
your work was considered outre or weird or
Yeah.
too female.
Too female. Let me
Mm.
tell you. Yes. Greenberg is kind of one of those art historians that I was referencing more with the modernists taking the spirituality out. But yeah, I can see how you are definitely using those feminine principles. And yeah, how was being a woman artist back in these 80s and 90s? And how was it for
I
you?
didn't know there was an option. And that probably saved me. So if I had known that there was a different way of doing it, I probably would have just left the art world instantly. But I've always been chiseling away at making the art world work for the kind of work and the kind of art making that I want to do, the process that I want to use. But now that I look back on it, I realize how much time I wasted trying to run with the boys, and I wouldn't do that again.
I, yeah, me either. Me either. I started running
Yeah,
with some.
I had, everyone started having, when you started school, I started school in the early 80s, college, you had to buy a Jansen art history book, big, huge white book that was on everyone's shelf. It's like the badge of like, oh, you've done some art history. And I'm so ready to throw that out, but it doesn't deserve to just be thrown out. It should be sacrificed. So I have to figure out the perfect way to sacrifice my Jansen book, because I just hate everything it stands for. It's like this thick, it's 4 inches thick of 40 white male artists from
Right.
1920 to
Right.
maybe 1880 to 1960. And African art has maybe a quarter of an inch. Female artists, I don't even know who's in there, Mary Cassatt. And it was like, and I just swallowed that. I was like, oh, okay, that's the
Yeah.
truth. I had no
Indoctrinated.
idea.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever see the painter Hilma af Klint?
Oh, of course.
They did, yeah. When I didn't see that show until it was at the Guggenheim, like, I don't know, 6 years ago or so. And to realize that that painting, which was so groundbreaking, was under wraps because she had been told, who was it, Kandinsky came into her studio and said, I don't know where this is going. And she was so far ahead of Kandinsky. I mean, she was just completely beating him at his own game. And I'm
Yeah.
sure he was terribly threatened by it. Put her down. She put her work in the can, and we never got to see it until it was free for showing. And I
Right.
feel like if I had seen Hilma af Klint a lot earlier, I think I would have taken a different passage. I just didn't know it existed.
Me too. I know that, and I've actually done a podcast talking about her work because I recently just revisited her catalog from the Guggenheim, and yeah, she was. They were able to go through some of her journals and just talking about her spirit guides helping her and where the colors were coming from and what it meant on a universal level. Like here, yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So
She
I,
is
and
amazing.
just that, to be able to create like that. I mean, just think how different the world would be if more people were able to do that freely and it was celebrated
And
instead of just
confidently.
the top
Yeah,
40. Yeah. The top
right.
40 white dudes.
I know. I had sometimes went through an exercise of like just naming 10 different artists per month that were not white guys.
It's hard.
It was hard when I first was
Yeah.
challenged
It's
with
getting
that
easier. I
question.
mean, yeah, but
Yeah.
it was really hard. I don't
Well,
know if in like when I was a sophomore in college, taking all this art history, if I could have done that.
oh, right. Ooh, that's a scary question right there, Stacy. That's a scary one. I don't know. But let's go back to your work in the in glass. Were any of the sculptures that you made in glass made for public art? Because you mentioned the bus stop, so I was wondering if I missed one.
Well, the bus stop one, the idea is there's a project in Seattle on East Lake Avenue that has insets of, it's called Cornerstones, which is the name of what when you demarcate the ownership of a sidewalk, it's the cornerstone. And so I riffed on that, and I thought, this is about this neighborhood. Who else is living in this neighborhood? And it made me think about microorganisms that were swimming in Lake Union. And then I thought, well, they're on that side of the street. And what's on the other side? Maybe those are the more soil-borne microorganisms. So I pictured them and then put the street names in glass, in cast glass. It was cast by this great guy named Jerry Newcomb. And we were casting that, and a little compass too that was in there. And it makes this postage stamp on the big manila envelope of the sidewalk. So it's something glittery and beautiful to sort of walk towards. And there are bus stops where you're close to them so you can see them. But as you're walking down a sort of mundane street, I love East St. Clair Avenue, but I mean, it's not that scenic. And you're always looking at your feet when you're walking. You get these these little postage stamps that are beautiful that introduce you to the other neighbors in your neighborhood, the microscopic neighbors, but also tell you where you are and give you this burst of color. And it's just a pleasure.
It's just a pleasure. It's just aesthetically, it's just a pleasure. But I got to tell you, starting this series, Climate Pledge in Glass, has helped me see artwork in my own city that I have never seen before. You're on the East Coast, you've been there for decades, and here you've made this installation in Seattle. And I'm a glass expert, Stacy, and I'm just going to tell you right here and now, I don't think I have a picture of it. I don't recall ever seeing it. So my pledge to you is that I'm going to go see it by
Head it out. And
October
you better
20th.
go quick because they're about to change. They're about to dig up East Lake Avenue, and I'm actually remaking the piece so that it can be put back in when the avenue is completed. So.
Oh, congratulations. And wait, and you also have something at Mineral Park or
Mineral Springs Park. Yeah,
Mineral
that's
Springs.
a stone piece, very reflective of the sky with these beautiful granite. There are some working in granite. There are polished granite stones that do a perfect reflection of the sky. And then the stones, there's text around the stones that talk about if you see the sky, what weather you're getting.
I've seen pictures of that because I was going to go over there yesterday. But you're right. You coined it perfectly. It perfectly reflects and even refracts a little bit because it gives a lot of perspectives on the clouds.
Right.
So there are these
and where are you looking
domes.
when you walk the dog? You're looking
Right.
down. So I've gone outside, not even registered what the weather is. So as a dog walker, I was like, hey, people, I'm gonna give you some sky, even though you're looking at your dog.
Oh, wow. That's really neat. That's such a community thing to think about when you're doing that.
Yeah, I think that I like to incorporate the everyday in art because I don't think art should be something you just do on a Saturday when you go to the museum. I want you to have it in your daily passage through life. So that's where the parking lot comes in. That's where the dog park comes in.
Oh, wow. And then the Tide series, because the tides are changing every day. So you have this Tide series where you have installed, and we're kind of getting away from your glass series, but glass medium rather, but you have made flower petals to help individuals become more present, if you will,
Right,
with the
right. Or
tides.
amplify the tide so you can see it. Because the tide is very hard to see unless there's some kind of marker. But the markers that are in urban areas are usually you have a wall, and if the tide is rising on the wall, it erases its wet mark as it goes up. So you can't see where it came from. You have no sense. At high tide, you have no sense that that's not always. And then as it drops, you can see that wet mark, but most people don't follow that's a pretty subtle, not particularly evocative kind of way of measuring things. But I always think about things like your speedometer back in the day before it was digital, when it was that orange arrow that would move up and down. And I always love that. Or the mercury in a thermometer, the whatever's the red
Yes,
mercury.
that's what your melting
It,
pot
yes,
or
that it
melting point.
told you what that like it's just totally intuitive. You don't have to read numbers. You just can tell like that's a fever and that's not, it's like 3 inches is a fever and a quarter inches is not. So it's a cool thing to be able to read a situation through color or through shape. And so that's what I wanted to do with the tide flowers, which are fully bloomed at high tide, and then they drop their petals at low tide. And the joy of that is there's no mechanics beyond a hinge. There's nothing that's pushing them up with a timer or anything that could fail. Not that they don't fail on their own, but it's a simple mechanism that uses the top surface of the water as the level that buoys them up. So they're extended out at high tide and they drop at half tide. They're kind of like you might stand with your arms, and then your arms are close to your body at low tide. And then they just go back up again for the next 6 hours. So
Oh, that sounds so neat. And the pictures of it, they were like hot pink petals.
that's the
And
speedometer arrow
that's
speaking.
what medium is that?
That is marine vinyl, which is super UV fadey. It's like, I love to make them out of glass because then they'd keep that color, but that's a material that I use that does not hold its color very well.
Okay. Wow. And so what was the time range? Was that an ephemeral? Was that like a performance piece, or is that something that you often redo?
Well, I love you talking about my work as series because it doesn't I don't like work on a series and I'm done with it. It's like my series are interlocking. If someone gives me a
Yes.
place where tides happen, I'm working on a
Yes.
tide. If someone
Right.
gives me a place where the sky is more prevalent or the wind, I'm working on those natural uh, phenomenon. So the tide piece has been going on. It was to be installed as a permanent piece in Manhattan, but there are issues with the pilings, and so it's sort of been on hold for a long time. But I've been able to do it in other places on other tidal rivers. The East Coast has fabulous tidal rivers in New York and Philadelphia, down in Virginia, North Carolina, wherever whatever river is flowing into the ocean, it's going to be pushed back when the tide rises. So I grew up in Philadelphia with a 6 foot tide in my local river, but I didn't know about it. I didn't know until I was like 22 that there was a tide in the river. And I thought, oh my God, that was like, how could I not know this? So I have this mission where I feel like it's really important to know the cool things that are happening around you. And the idea that the tide is on a lunar clock, not a solar clock. And we're on a solar clock. And so the tide is sort of shifting at a different rate. And I think it's just very cool to know there's another clock in this world besides the all empowering solar clock.
This is why I admire what you do so very much, because if we can stay present to what is around us, then that's where we can uncomplicate any relationship with the natural world and our human existence.
I hope so. That's what I'm aiming for.
Me too. All right, I'm here to help you carry that torch. Um, there's another I'm going to call it series just because.
No, I like that. It's an
Okay.
interesting way of looking at it. And I actually have a really hard time like organizing my work because I organize it by tide, but then tide's happening on a river. So isn't that about a river? And what if you're talking about a watershed? Are you talking about a waterway? Or are you talking about climate change? So it's all
Right.
intermingled.
And
It's a
then
big,
yes,
big mesh.
you have a relationship with water.
I think I do. I think a lot of people do. I mean, it's something that a lot of people really love. I love swimming and I like being on boats, and I've been lucky that I had the proximity to water throughout my life that I could interact with it, and it's not a scary place for me, which it is for a lot of people. Say if you've never learned to swim, a river looks very different to you, especially if you have young kids who don't know how to swim. It's a scary place. And so I'm also trying to kind of work that, like, to try and make places along the river where people feel comfortable and not threatened by the power of the water.
Yeah, and I can so relate to that because in 1999, that's when I started my curatorial career as I was curating photography exhibits for river awareness.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah,
Why haven't our paths met?
I know,
Crossed.
because today had to be the day. It had to be climate pledge and talking about what we can do, how we can be more one and balance our relationship with this earth and between the sun and the moon and the planet. Yes, absolutely. So before we go, can we please talk about one more series that
Oh, sure,
um
yeah.
I was digging around, and it was one that really captured my attention, that you were it's so playful, but basically you have to talk us through it. But you were commissioned, you won a commission, I believe, to really capture the rain shed
Hmm.
and incorporate it very artistically into the grounds. And you made it look so playful. So it just continues your relationship with water. And this one was with rain, like on the grounds. It was more of a flat piece. It wasn't one of your installations that you have on the side of a building with, because you
Was it a
often,
map? Was it the watershed map that the rain runs through?
yes.
Because I do them in, the rain is really appealing to me. And I mean, you're in a rainy place,
Yeah.
but we get a yard of rain. Now we're getting more in this region in Pennsylvania. And the idea that, a yard of water falls out of the sky every year is quite amazing. And where does it go? I just never think about where it goes. I also spent a lot of time as a kid, like under broken gutters. My school had a couple of broken gutters. The minute it rained, we all went outside and stood under the gutters and got wet. And I thought that was wonderful. Of course, it's something you stop doing when you're older. You don't run out in the rain and splash in puddles. And I think that's kind of a missing part of life. So I'm trying to bring rain back, not as a, oh God, it's raining, what are we going to do? But like, hey, it's raining. Let's go watch it in action at this nature center or along this train station or something. And also because climate crisis is affecting places differently. Some places are getting droughtier. I'm living in a place that's getting wetter, substantially wetter. And I'm a gardener too, so I really see this firsthand. But we also see it through flooding. Places that
Yeah.
never flooded
Yeah.
are flooding all the time. Intersections are in 8 feet of water in urban areas that it's like, where did that come from? Well, where it came from was the old watershed being underneath, being sort of sealed over by our city grid, and then the rain coming in and doing what rain does. I mean, it's simply doing what it does. And so it's rain is the thing that really connects us to water, twice a week, because it's the water cycle that's happening in our lives. It's changing really rapidly with climate crisis. And we need to kind of embrace how rain works. We need to respect it for the life-giving force that it is. I mean, it's a lot of fresh water coming out of the sky. That's absolutely like that's like gold, and yet we treat it like it's dirt. We don't call rain when it hits the ground a nice term. We call it stormwater runoff, like it's a bad thing, like it's a nasty
Oh,
cocktail. And we should celebrate it. And you should witness being part of the hydrology cycle. And you should also remember how precious it is. And the reason that everything's beautiful and green where you live and where I live is because of moisture. And so celebrate the moisture that makes our world not look like pink kitty litter or a desert. So I'm really into this idea of honoring rain and letting you witness where you are on that cycle, like where you are between when the rain falls out of the sky and where it goes. I think you need to be responsible for knowing where your rain is going. And if you build a building, you need to be responsible for letting your building drink its own rainwater instead of sending it down into some poor creek and flooding that creek. So there's a kind of responsibility with the rain that we have.
if I had a rattle, I'd be rattling right now.
I'm rattling
It's
on, so.
no, because what you're saying should, the words that you're using, I think I'm hearing it in a different way, and I hope the listeners are hearing it in a different way, is that, yeah, you do need to take responsibility on your own self to respect the rain, to
It's
respect
true.
the
And
water that we
art
have.
can be that special suggestion that gives you a way in. Like if someone just comes up and says, hands you a textbook and says, this is what rain is. This is the hydrological system. This is where you are in it. You'd be like, "Ah, okay, thanks." But to actually witness it, to experience it viscerally, kinetically, is really important for you to get those building metaphors so you understand where you are in the world and where you are in these various cycles that are going on all the time, whether you know it or not. The cycles are happening and natural processes are occurring. And most people think, oh, nature's only happening like where it's green or, out there in the country. But nature is happening in the city every minute, every second. And we need to, as urban people, we need to understand where nature is and what it's doing and how we're like doing a dance with what the rain is doing. We're giving it no place to soak in. And then we're wondering why basement apartments are flooding.
Right.
So you
Right.
gotta see yourself in the cycle in order to start some of the small solutions that we need to start.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for showing us that in a different way. So these projects like the rain, these how long does some of that take? I mean, cuz you have to work with building engineers, you have to work with I don't I mean there's like
It's a
tens
big
of
team.
people. It's a
It's a
big
team.
team.
And it's very, I think that's the problem with the kind of work that I do is the art world can't embrace it because it's not a single person doing a heroic act. It's teamwork. I'm just part of a team. I'm directing the visual parts, but the engineer is suggesting, this is the way the water needs to run, and this is how much water we're going to have to deal with. And this is the 1,000-year storm, which we're probably going to have next week. And this is a 100-year storm, which happens every 10 years. And we got to build for all these things. So I have to be sort of like the composter of all of these disciplines. I'm or the mortar around the
Right.
disciplines to put them together in a brand new way. But that is not how the art world is structured. And that's probably why you've never seen the Cornerstones project, because even though it's a glass project and a stone project and a
Right.
zoology project,
Right.
because it isn't on a shelf, it doesn't get seen as art in a certain way. It's seen as, I don't know, I don't know what it's seen as, but whatever it is, I like working out there. And I just think that it should be more part of our lives because I think art you can walk on is great, and art that you can walk through and check out when the museums would be closed, but you can still see this is really a cool thing.
Absolutely. So just tell me a little bit more about these. So are you when you're working with the with rain
Mhm.
and incorporating how it should be recycled, like are you recycling some of it? And then how what was one of your like biggest challenges with working with that? Was it working with somebody directly or was it that there wasn't enough money in the budgets for everything that needed to happen? Like what were some of those challenges for you?
Right. Well, it's always all of these projects are made with lots of different budgets from different places because they require a certain amount of budget. And it's not just for the materials, but it's for the expertise and it's for the installation. Like I have to hire an engineer
Yeah.
and I have to get a lot of permissions to do these things. And I have to hire an ecologist, perhaps, if I'm creating a rain garden, with complicated slopes. And I have to hire someone who's going to dig the regrade the area so the rain has a place to go and doesn't go into the basement of the building, which is a real threat. And then I have to buy insurance in case the rain does go in the basement. And so there's lots and lots of steps. And really, I'm in meetings more than I'm in my studio. And
Wait a
I'm
minute.
writing,
You
yeah.
got to buy the insurance for that? Wouldn't the
Oh,
building?
yeah. Sure.
Because
Yeah.
it's the
But that's a
concept.
typical public art thing. You have to carry a lot of insurance when
Okay.
you're doing that because it's out in public, which I love, but it also comes at a cost. And because it's out underfoot, which I love, but it comes at a cost. In order to really be enmeshed in people's lives, you have more liability than you are if you work in a museum, which is why actually I love to work in museums because I never have to worry about someone putting their eye out on my project because there's a guard standing there to make sure it's no one's going to touch it. But at the same time, that's sort of depressing too, that nobody touches it or lies down on it or walks through it properly. So the museums are great for certain things, and I utilize them for trying out a lot of ideas. And I'll try out ideas in glass often that are too fragile to be taken out into the real world. And then I have to rethink the materials. So, such as my watershed pieces, I've done big collections in glass jars that are on the floor of the gallery or the museum. And we go out and collect water from every single tributary, and we carefully pour it in whatever stream is running across the floor. And there's glass all over the floor. It's incredibly dangerous if you don't watch out. But so that's the museum version. But then when I take it outside, I need to make those tributaries out of something like stone that's harder, or something like metal mesh. And I have to deal with actual rain or actual water that's going to flow through there. So it's a whole different set of issues. Though the
Amazing.
curators will tell me that my stuff is difficult because there's so much water involved, it makes the humidity in the gallery a lot higher, which is not a great thing for people who are
Right. And
trying
a
to
lot of
maintain their
people,
art. So
yeah. And a lot of people may not know that museums have temperature thermometers like throughout.
unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Temperature and humidity controls super intense, and I'm usually kind of a thorn in the side of the curator
For
that
the
way.
moisture
But
level, and because the work, most of the time you have a lot of elements. So
yeah,
there's a lot of work. You're not just hanging one 75
right.
pound
It's not
painting
one, like, it doesn't come with one hook, and yeah, so
and a
I usually have to
wire.
come with my pieces to put them in. So
Oh my goodness. Hey, so what do you think? Do you think of your work as political discourse? Kind of getting a little
I
heavier.
I do and I don't. It's not direct
Yeah,
activism. It's not direct discourse. But I think that making a metaphor is a very important first step for people to understand what they're fighting for, and what they really need. Like, how do you know you need rain if it's falling out of your sky and you're wearing suede shoes and it's just a mess? How could you understand that you want that stuff to be underfoot? So I'm trying to get that into people's minds so that they see that even though it's kind of annoying some of the time, it's really wonderful other times, sort of like a toddler, that it's a tremendous essential value to us. And so I'm the one who's creating the metaphors so that gets like in from the soles of your shoes up into your brain, into your heart. But I'm not coming out with a slogan per se,
okay.
because I don't do that. A lot of other people do that much better than I do. I realize that I have to fit into my niche, and I can't pretend to do it a different way. I'm in my I went to a Quaker school, and there's a very definite sense that art is something that's quite nice to do on the weekend, but you should have a real job
You
that
should.
really makes a change in the world. And so I've had many years to try and make peace with that mission. Like, what are you going to do to change the world? And it's been hard to find how to make art have that mission. So I see that I'm trying to have people learn where they are in the world and give them a more visceral sense of that instead of a textbook or a slogan. But I'm also trying to show how art can be part of a solution, a very, very small piece of the solution, but a drop in the bucket is better than a crack in the bucket. So I'm trying to add to the idea that there are small solutions that might buy us some more time with climate crisis.
Absolutely. And the art is one of the most powerful communication tools to help people shift their perspective and to create that change that is needed for
I
them to
like to
take
think that
responsibility.
that it does help people change, but not if they don't see it. And
Yeah.
the problem with where art gets sort of buried in galleries, not that I don't love galleries, and museums where I love to spend my weekend, but it is not accessible to most people. And if a gallery is only open from 9 to 5 and you happen to have a job, which also takes you and keeps you busy from 9 to 5, when are you supposed to see that gallery? When do you get to the inside of that gallery? You don't, which is why I like galleries with windows, because I always put my pieces on the window side
On
of
the Windows
things.
side. Yeah.
So
What's in there?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
in order to make art really part of people's worlds, I think it has to happen in different places. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Art in different places. And yeah, respect the rain. I mean, I can see it, hats and t-shirts. Not that I'm super into exit the gift shop, but I am. So
It has its moments. I'm starting to learn about swag. I mean,
yeah.
I have a an idea called a home for the rain, which is what we're trying to build, somewhere where the rain can go. But it's like a joke on a home on the range, a kind of a sidewise slippery pun. But I mean, it should be something where everyone could figure out how to make their driveway a better home for the rain, or their backyard a home for the rain. So
Yeah. Well, after the Industrial Revolution, we just got in this mode of, you go home, you go to work, you eat some food, and, respecting the rain, respecting and taking responsibility on yourself to look around and be more present with where we are on Earth, I think just got, yeah, demolished, just
yeah, yeah.
suppressed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And historically, I don't quite know when that happened. I'm always interested. It's like, is it the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, or was it just being it's capitalism that did that? And
Capitalism.
everyone's just pressed down, and 8 hours
Yeah.
of work, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours to do what you will.
I
It's like,
hate,
oh my
yeah, I'm
God.
learning just that is not my way. But I always say in the Industrial Revolution, just to start with the timeline, because, yeah, I can get real trippy on you real quick. And, when we stopped being hunters and gatherers, really, and we started cultivating food agriculturally with one crop and, maybe switching out the next crop. But it's when we stopped going where the food was and making the food
Yeah.
be exactly where
Come to
we
us.
are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And all sorts of weird stuff happens then.
Yes. Yeah. And the Romans, oh, oh.
But what civilization? I mean, it's extraordinary.
I
So
know. Yeah, because their waterways were pretty
they
sophisticated,
did
right?
amazing. They respected water, and they moved it around, and they had great drainage systems in their city. In Pompeii,
Yes.
amazing
Right.
drainage of the streets, and fabulous rocks that you would come across, flat rocks, where if the water was pouring because of a big rainstorm, you could get across and stay fairly dry. So they really understood like rain was going to happen, and they needed to contend with it.
This is why I think art is one of the most powerful communication tools, is because this is how I remember things through
Mhm.
history, is through the art.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
Abs-
It is,
It's
it's because art is a metaphor maker, and we really think in metaphors because we're very visual people, so it has to have
yes.
a visual translation.
Yes.
And I guess, I mean, that's like, well, that's what I can do in this world. That's so that becomes my job.
How so just on the visual thing, how do you like the this resurgence of the visual world coming back? And I'm using the example with emojis. How do you like
Oh,
all the emoji language?
uh, I was a huge fan of rebus, that when you would write out words, like use an eyeball and then a heart and then
Yes.
a sheep, and it would say I love you if you knew your
Of
way
course.
around.
Oh yes. Yes.
But so I like it done that way, but I actually, maybe if there were better emojis. It's just that we all are using the same one. I don't want to be a smiley face. I never feel a smiley face in my heart. I just feel a cynical smiley face. So they don't have that. So I haven't quite I haven't quite gotten into them yet. But I
Yeah.
do like the fact that it is this visual simplification, or it's picturing, and I like the fact that people are into pictures. But unfortunately, the pictures that people are spending time on, and I spend time on, I've gotten lost. I've lost a lot of hours on Instagram and TikTok, is that they're moving so fast,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're over and done with something. Whereas, if you think about like glass blowing, there's a long, you have to draw it out, and then you draw it on the floor, and then you get your team together, and then you start melting the glass, and you've ordered your color, and you're melting that down, and then you're making it, and then it's back in the oven, then you're annealing it for 3 weeks. It's such a slow process that it's like when we want to see that, we have to speed it up because we only have the attention span for 20
Of a
minutes or 20
of a
seconds. So
hummingbird. Yeah, we have to be
yeah, yeah.
so. Yes,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
it's, it's so the visual world, it may be expanding in its visuals, but it's being minimized in its time that we're giving it. So people are not staring at fields of flowers. That's what I would like
Right.
people to do.
Well, that's the emoji I want to give you is just flowers and hearts and some rain because from today's conversation, I think, yeah, respecting the rain is what I would like to work on. And for moving forward for me, I always, living in the Pacific Northwest, when the fall would come, I would always say if I was grumpy the first time the rain fell on my face, then to me spiritually that meant that I was going to have a hard fall, whatever
Oh,
that meant
interesting.
that
You're
season.
like Punxsutawney Phil the groundhog, whose
Yeah.
your prediction is coming. Yeah.
But if
But
like
yeah.
if I enjoyed it and I embraced it and I wanted more, then I knew I was probably going to have a happier autumn season. So, I mean, I still to this day do that. So, the
That's an
autumn is upon
interesting way
us,
of
so we'll
doing it.
see.
It's true. And I mean, I get grumpy in the rain because I wanted to do something that the rain is preventing me, or I've got to carry a drawing from my car to my studio or something, and it's pouring rain, the thing's going to turn into pulp. There are a lot of times I get annoyed by the rain, but I have to keep rewriting my route to acceptance. And I don't know. I really hope that people who were coming to my rain projects are saying, it's a rainy day, let's go to this nature center so that we can see the rain. That would be like to change the mood that rain creates would be a really great thing. If I can do that, I've done something. So
Yes. And with that, I'm going to make sure that everybody has a link to your website.
great. Yeah.
And I just can't thank you enough today. I hope everybody can go to your website and your website's one of the best out there. So, yeah, your pictures are wonderful. And um, yeah, if they want to get a hold of you, they can contact you directly and they can contact me too. And all my information's on there and I'll make sure to get them right over to you if they've got a project for their city or for their building. I do have a workshop coming up about art in public places. So
Mm.
I'm probably going to remind people that even works of art for public, it doesn't have to be a sculpture. It can also be a way to capture the rain in a very creative way to give some aesthetics back to um, our world here.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that great social urban space is a perfect place to have art happen, but it doesn't have to be on a pedestal.
It doesn't. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be one spout running down a building either.
True.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's great to have this time to talk together and to get into rain on both coasts.
Absolutely. Coast to coast, baby.